It was a bright and crisp autumn day, the kind of day where the leaves painted the forest floor in shades of gold and amber. The air smelled fresh, and the rustling of the trees seemed to sing a peaceful lullaby. For most people, it was the perfect day for a hike in the woods, but for one little girl, it would turn into the scariest and most extraordinary day of her life. Deep in the heart of the wilderness, where the trees grew tall and the mountains cast long shadows, a child had become lost. Alone in the vast expanse of nature, the little girl wandered, disoriented and afraid. No one knew where she had gone. Her family had been distracted for just a moment, but that brief lapse was enough for her to slip away from their sight and venture into the wilderness. As the sun began to set, the warmth of the day started to fade, and the woods became darker, more foreboding. Panic set in. The child's family searched desperately, calling her name, but the dense forest swallowed the sound, leaving no trace. Fear gripped their hearts. In the midst of this terrifying moment, however, an unexpected hero emerged. A horse, trusted, loyal, and perhaps more attuned to the dangers of the wilderness than anyone realized, was about to perform an act of bravery that no one could have anticipated. This is the story of a horse who defied all expectations, following his instincts to become a life-saving hero, a bond between humans and animals so strong that it transcended anything anyone could have imagined. A story of loyalty, courage, and the power of an animal's love. The story begins with a family who lived on the edge of a small town, nestled in the foothills of a vast mountain range. Their home was surrounded by dense forests, rolling meadows, and winding trails, a place where the natural beauty of the landscape made it feel like a world unto itself. The family was tight-knit, and they spent most of their time outdoors, exploring, hiking, and enjoying the wilderness together. At the center of this family was a young girl named Lily, a bright, adventurous soul with a heart full of curiosity. Lily loved the outdoors, especially spending time with her family's horse, a strong, majestic steed named Midnight. Midnight had been with the family for years, and to Lily, he wasn't just a horse. He was a confidant, a protector, and a companion. The bond they shared was something extraordinary, built over years of riding together through the mountains and sharing moments of quiet connection by the barn. Midnight wasn't like most horses. He was calm, patient, and deeply intuitive. His strong frame was a perfect match for the rugged terrain of the mountains, but it was his intelligence and uncanny sense of what was going on around him that made him truly special. While other horses may have been more skittish or less focused, Midnight seemed to understand things beyond what was visible. He could sense the moods of those around him, and it wasn't uncommon for him to react to situations in ways that baffled even the family. The family's home was isolated, but they had come to love the tranquility that came with it. They had a routine that involved daily walks through the forest, tending to their animals, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. On this particular day, however, something unusual was about to happen. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Lily, her parents, and her older brother Alex had spent the morning exploring a nearby trail. The weather had been perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, and a soft breeze that rustled the leaves in the trees. Lily was full of energy, her laughter echoing through the woods as she dashed ahead on the trail, her small legs outpacing the others. Midnight trotted quietly beside her, ever watchful, as he always was. The family had planned to stop for a break in a clearing a few miles into the woods, but Lily, always the adventurer, wanted to go further. She was drawn to a path that she had noticed before, but never dared to explore alone. It seemed inviting, winding deeper into the forest, its edges lined with tall, ancient trees whose roots twisted up from the earth like gnarled fingers. The path was narrow, but to Lily it felt like a secret that the forest was whispering to her, urging her to discover what lay beyond. Her parents, momentarily distracted by a conversation, didn't notice when Lily slipped away. Midnight, however, noticed. He whinnied softly, his ears flicking in Lily's direction. But Lily, with her sense of wonder and her thirst for exploration, was already a few paces ahead. She was too far into the woods before her family realized that she had strayed off the main path. And so, the adventure that had started so innocently began to take a dark turn. As Lily ventured further into the forest, her excitement gave way to uncertainty. The path became steeper and harder to navigate. The trees grew thicker, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder and more unfamiliar. She called out to her parents, but the thick canopy above swallowed her voice, leaving her feeling alone and vulnerable. Back at the clearing, the family began to search for her, calling out her name, their voices growing more frantic with every passing minute. It was then that Midnight, sensing the urgency and danger in the air, did something that would forever change the course of the day. The sun began its slow descent in the sky, casting long shadows over the forest floor. What had started as an afternoon hike filled with excitement and laughter was now turning into a frantic search. Lily's parents called her name, their voices growing hoarse with worry. They scanned the woods, but the thick trees and dense underbrush made it impossible to see far ahead. Lily had been so certain about her path, her heart racing with excitement as she ventured deeper into the wilderness. But as the forest closed in around her, the sense of adventure started to turn into a quiet panic. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, blocking out the sunlight and casting the forest in an eerie half-light. The path had become uneven, and the once inviting route now felt dark and unfamiliar. She called out, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness, but no one answered. The sounds of the forest seemed to mock her calls, rustling leaves, chirping birds, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The silence that followed her words felt heavy and oppressive, and fear began to creep into her heart. Lily had strayed farther than she had intended, and now she couldn't find her way back. As she continued to walk, the chill of the evening began to settle in. The sun was now hidden behind the thick canopy of trees, and Lily shivered, the shadows growing longer with each passing minute. She stopped for a moment, trying to listen for the sound of her family, but all she could hear was the whisper of the wind through the branches. Her small voice, once filled with excitement, was now laced with worry. She wasn't just lost, she was truly alone. Meanwhile, back at the clearing, panic had set in. Her family realized with growing dread that they had no idea where she had gone. The minutes turned to hours as they scoured the area, calling her name again and again. Alex, Lily's older brother, ran ahead, pushing through the trees in a desperate search. Their parents, Sarah and Michael, were equally frantic, their voices growing increasingly sharp with anxiety. They tried retracing their steps, but every direction they took seemed to lead to more trees, more brush, and no sign of Lily. The more they searched, the more hopeless it felt. The forest, once so familiar and beautiful, now felt like an endless maze that swallowed them whole. It was then that Midnight, who had been quietly grazing nearby, sensed something was wrong. His ears flicked back, and he snorted, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Midnight was more than just a pet to the family. He was part of the family. Over the years, he had grown incredibly attuned to the family's moods and actions, often staying close by when something was amiss. He knew something wasn't right, and he immediately began to act. Midnight trotted over to Sarah, his head low and his tail stiff. He whinnied softly, nudging her gently with his muzzle. Sarah, still calling out for Lily, looked up in surprise. She noticed the unusual urgency in Midnight's demeanor. He was trying to tell her something. "Midnight, what is it?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure if she expected him to answer. But the horse was insistent. He stamped his hoof, his eyes fixed on the direction Lily had gone. His movements were sharp, purposeful. Michael, who had been combing the woods nearby, turned to see what was going on. He approached Sarah and Midnight, his expression one of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to make sense of the horse's behavior. Michael, who had been combing the woods nearby, turned to see what was going on. He approached Sarah and Midnight, his expression one of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to make sense of the horse's behavior. Before Sarah could answer, Midnight broke into a trot, heading down the trail that Lily had taken. It was as if he knew exactly where to go. Without a second thought, Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, and, in a moment of instinctual trust, followed the horse into the woods. Alex, who had been searching frantically in the opposite direction, caught sight of them and sprinted over. "Dad! Mom! Where are we going?" he shouted, breathless. "Midnight. He's leading us," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief. Midnight, with his head held high and his strong legs moving with purpose, was guiding them down the path Lily had taken. The horse's calm yet confident demeanor gave them the strength to keep moving, even though they had no idea what lay ahead. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more unsure they became of their surroundings. But Midnight remained unwavering, his hooves clattering softly on the ground, as if the forest itself was giving way to his steady determination. And so, the family followed Midnight into the heart of the wilderness, their hope renewed by the trust they had in their loyal horse. But with each step, they couldn't shake the fear that time was running out. The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. Lily was out there somewhere, alone and scared, but the horse was leading them closer to her. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more the shadows seemed to stretch around them. The path became narrower, and the once familiar landscape was now unrecognizable. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig beneath their feet, seemed to heighten their anxiety. But Midnight, steady and calm as ever, moved confidently ahead, his strong legs pushing through the underbrush with a determination that couldn't be ignored. It was as though the forest had become a labyrinth, its tall trees towering like silent guardians, blocking the family's view of everything beyond. The distant sound of an owl hooting in the trees and the occasional rustle of wildlife was all they could hear, creating an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air. Sarah, clutching her jacket tightly against the growing chill, glanced at Midnight as he moved with purpose. She couldn't help but marvel at the horse's calm. Despite the uncertainty surrounding them, Midnight seemed to know exactly where he was going. He was not only a trusted companion, he was acting with an instinctive awareness that was beyond what any human could comprehend. Michael, sensing his wife's unease, spoke softly to her, trying to reassure her. "We're getting closer. I can feel it. He's not steering us wrong. Midnight's always been more than just a horse. He's something else, something special." The horse stopped abruptly, his ears flicking forward as if listening to something unseen. He stood motionless for a moment, and the family instinctively froze, their senses heightened. Midnight's posture was alert, his head held high, his nostrils flaring as he seemed to inhale the very air around him. Then, without warning, Midnight turned sharply to the left, making a beeline for a thicket of dense trees. His hooves kicked up dirt and leaves as he charged ahead, unbothered by the brambles that blocked his path. The family watched in awe, struggling to keep up as they hurried after him. It was as if the forest itself had given way to Midnight's keen instincts. His every move was deliberate, as though he could feel something the others couldn't, something that guided him to where they needed to go. "Midnight, wait," Sarah called out. But the horse continued without hesitation. It was clear now that he wasn't just reacting to their presence. He was actively leading them forward, guiding them through the darkening woods. A wave of relief washed over Sarah as she realized the horse wasn't simply walking aimlessly. He was navigating through the wilderness with precision. The family had always known Midnight was intuitive, but they had never seen him like this. His behavior was almost human, as if he understood the urgency of the situation and was focused entirely on finding Lily. They continued to follow, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, trying to keep up with the gallant steed. Each moment seemed to stretch on forever. The sun had completely vanished beneath the horizon, leaving only a sliver of twilight in the sky, and the air was growing colder with every passing minute. Yet Midnight pressed on, unbothered by the encroaching darkness. The horse was clearly accustomed to the wilderness. His hooves seemed to know every turn, every rock, every ridge. Midnight moved like an expert, as if the forest had always been his domain. Then, just when it felt like they couldn't continue any longer, Midnight stopped. His ears twitched, and he lifted his head, his nostrils flaring as he scanned the woods in front of him. He was still, utterly focused on something ahead. The family, breathless from the chase, watched closely, their hearts racing. They could feel it, the moment they had been waiting for. And then, out of the darkness, they heard it, a faint, trembling voice calling out, barely audible over the wind. "Mom? Dad!" It was Lily. The family froze, and for a split second time seemed to stop. The sound of Lily's voice broke through the silence like a beacon, cutting through the dread that had been building in their hearts. They were close, so close. Without a second thought, Midnight's hooves began moving again, this time faster. As if propelled by a force they could barely comprehend, the family followed, the sounds of Lily's voice growing clearer with each step, until finally they saw her. There, standing in a small clearing, was Lily, cold, tired, but very much alive. She was huddled near a large rock, her hands clutching her knees, her face pale from the cold and fear. Her eyes widened in surprise as she saw her parents and brother rush toward her, but the greatest surprise of all came when she saw Midnight standing just a few feet away, watching her with a look of calm reassurance. Lily's lips trembled as she whispered, "Midnight, you found me?" Her parents rushed to her side, enveloping her in a tight embrace. Relief flooded through them as they held her close, their voices shaking with emotion. But amidst all the overwhelming joy and relief, one thing was clear: none of this would have been possible without Midnight's extraordinary instincts. The horse stood by them, his strong frame bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, watching over them as if to ensure they were all safe. Midnight had guided them to Lily, using something deeper than mere instinct. He had used his deep connection to the family, his understanding of the land, and the unspoken bond that had always existed between them. It was a moment that none of them would ever forget. The quiet heroism of a horse whose heart knew no limits, whose loyalty and bravery had led to the rescue of the one person he cared for most. As Lily's voice echoed through the trees, the family rushed toward her, driven by the overwhelming need to hold her, to keep her safe. The sight of her, tired, cold and small against the vast wilderness, was almost too much to bear. Her parents enveloped her in a protective embrace, their hearts pounding with relief. But amid the reunion, one thing stood out more than anything else. Midnight. The horse stood a few feet away, his strong frame silhouetted against the moonlight. His steady presence felt like a silent guardian, watching over the family as if he had always known that this moment would come. Midnight had been their guide, their protector, and now he was the one who had brought them to safety. Lily's eyes, wide with awe and gratitude, shifted to Midnight as she slowly stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Midnight," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you found me. How did you know where I was?" The horse stood still, his deep brown eyes soft with understanding. He seemed to know exactly what was happening, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling around him. The family, still recovering from their panic, could hardly process the magnitude of what had just occurred. It felt almost surreal, the way Midnight had led them so effortlessly, without hesitation, through the treacherous woods to find Lily. As Sarah crouched down beside her daughter, still gripping her tightly, she looked up at Midnight with an expression of awe. "I don't know how you did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but thank you. You brought our baby back to us." Michael, still panting from the rush to find Lily, placed a hand on Midnight's neck. He had always known the horse to be loyal, but this act of bravery, this instinctive drive to find Lily and bring her home, was something beyond what any of them had ever expected. "You're more than just a horse," Michael muttered, his voice full of reverence. "You're a hero." Midnight stood there quietly, as if he had done nothing extraordinary. His eyes flicked between the family members, as if ensuring that everyone was safe and accounted for. It was as though he was simply fulfilling the role he had always known to be his, protecting the ones he loved. Lily, who had been so frightened just moments ago, now felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her. She knew she was safe. She knew Midnight had found her, and in that instant, the bond between them seemed to deepen in a way she could never have imagined. The horse wasn't just her companion. He was her guardian, her protector, and perhaps in some unspoken way, he understood her better than anyone else. As the family took a moment to breathe, taking in the full weight of what had just happened, they realized that this miraculous discovery was not just about finding Lily. It was about the deep connection between humans and animals, the bond that transcends words and logic, the quiet understanding that goes beyond any explanation. And then, as if on cue, Midnight gave a gentle whinny, a soft sound that seemed to ease the lingering tension in the air. The family looked up in surprise, realizing that it was as if the horse was telling them it was time to go home. The crisis was over, and Lily was safe. With Midnight leading the way, the family began their journey back through the woods. The path, once so unfamiliar and daunting, now seemed less threatening. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow on the forest floor, guiding them back to safety. Midnight's steady presence in the front of the group was like a beacon, his hooves striking a rhythmic pattern as he led them out of the wilderness and back to the comfort of their home. The family walked in silence, each of them processing the gravity of the day. Lily, nestled between her parents, clutched onto Midnight's mane as they walked. She didn't need to say anything. She knew that in some way the horse had saved her life. And she would never forget the heroic actions of the one creature who had shown her nothing but loyalty, love, and protection. The trek back to their home felt like an eternity, but with each step, the weight of fear lifted from their shoulders. The sounds of the forest seemed softer now, and the chill in the air no longer felt as oppressive. They were headed home, and everything would be okay. When they finally emerged from the woods, their small house in the distance was a sight more beautiful than ever before. The family had made it through, thanks to Midnight's instincts and his unwavering dedication. The horse had brought them together again, and as they crossed the threshold into the warmth and safety of their home, they knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together, with Midnight by their side. As the family stepped over the threshold into the warmth of their home, the exhaustion of the long, tense day seemed to settle in. They had made it, safe, reunited, and more grateful than ever. The door clicked shut behind them, blocking out the cold air and the darkness of the forest. They were home, and the sense of relief was overwhelming. But as they gathered in the cozy living room, it became clear that the emotional journey wasn't over. Lily, still clutching Midnight's mane, looked up at her parents, her wide eyes filled with both wonder and gratitude. She had never felt such an intense bond with the horse before, though their connection had always been special. Midnight had not only saved her, he had known exactly how to find her, how to lead them through the forest. "Mom, Dad, did you see how he led us?" Lily asked, her voice soft and filled with awe. He knew exactly where to go. It's like he understood everything. Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, both parents still shaken by the enormity of what had just happened. Michael let out a shaky breath and nodded. "I don't know how he did it," he admitted, "but Midnight is something special. He's not just a horse. He's a hero." Lily's eyes sparkled with admiration as she gazed at Midnight, who was calmly grazing by the doorway as if the day's events were nothing more than another adventure to him. Midnight's gentle eyes met hers, and in that moment, Lily knew the bond they shared was something deeper than words could express. He had been her protector, her guide, and her savior, and she had always known there was something extraordinary about him, something beyond the ordinary world of horses. Midnight was a creature who understood, a being whose heart had aligned perfectly with the needs of his family. That evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, they couldn't help but talk about the incredible turn of events. The story of Midnight's miraculous rescue would be one they would tell for years to come. But it wasn't just the drama of the moment that made it unforgettable. It was the recognition of the incredible bond between humans and animals, and how love, loyalty, and instinct could transcend barriers. After dinner, they spent the evening in quiet reflection, grateful for each other's company and the safety they now shared. Lily, nestled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her, couldn't stop thinking about Midnight. Her eyes kept drifting toward the door where the horse stood, as if watching over them. Her parents could sense the same gratitude and wonder in her. Midnight had not only brought their daughter home, he had rekindled a deeper understanding of the powerful connection between humans and the creatures they care for. Midnight, for his part, seemed perfectly content. He had done his job, fulfilled his role, and now he was ready to rest. The horse had a quiet majesty about him, a calmness that was infectious to those around him. As the family gathered around him in the living room, Midnight accepted their attention with gentle nuzzles, his steady gaze offering comfort to them all. It was as though he knew that the job wasn't done yet. The family needed time to process, to be together, and reflect on the extraordinary gift they had received. The following morning, after a restful night's sleep, the family decided to take Midnight on a special ride. They were not just taking him out for a typical trail ride, but rather as an expression of gratitude for everything he had done. It was a moment to honor the horse, who had become more than just a pet. He had become family. As they rode through the meadow, the crisp morning air brushing against their faces, they couldn't help but reflect on the miracle of the previous day. The sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. The woods that had once felt dark and menacing now seemed peaceful and full of promise. They were reminded of the power of the natural world, of the strength and wisdom of the animals who shared the land with them. Lily, riding atop Midnight, felt a profound sense of connection. She could feel the gentle rhythm of the horse's steps beneath her, each one a reminder of how close they were. She had always known there was something special about Midnight, but now, after the events of the past 24 hours, she felt as though their bond had deepened in ways she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was the spiritual, emotional connection that they shared. Midnight had always known what she needed, and now, in return, she knew that she would always be there for him, just as he had been there for her. Back at the house, Sarah and Michael stood together watching their children ride across the meadow. Midnight, the quiet hero, had given them more than they could have ever imagined. He had led them through the darkest hour of their lives and brought them back to the light. They didn't have the answers to how Midnight had done it, but they didn't need to. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are the ones that can't be explained, only felt. And so, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the family rode together, connected not just by blood, but by the unbreakable bond they shared with their horse. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, but through it all, Midnight had been their constant, guiding them through the wilderness and back to each other. The family would never forget the extraordinary courage of the horse who had led them home. Midnight's bravery would become part of their legacy, a story they would share for generations to come. It was a reminder that, in times of need, love and loyalty could shine brighter than anything else, and that animals, with their unwavering instincts and hearts of gold, could often be the greatest heroes of all.